You know, President Biden is concerned about political violence, but if you listened only to the president, you would think political violence is something only Trump voters are capable of. Well, this week, the Religious Freedom Institute released a threat advisory titled Religious Pro-Life Americans Under Attack, a threat assessment of post-Dobbs America. The report provides clear and direct evidence that pro-life organizations, churches, and schools face persistent criminal threats. Despite these ongoing dangers, there have been few arrests. Joining me now to discuss this is Nathaniel Hurd, a senior fellow for public policy for the Religious Freedom Institute and one of the authors of the report. Nathaniel, welcome to Washington Watch.
It's good to be with you, Joseph. Thanks for having me.
Tell us what you found.
The criminal attacks that you referred to are not a local problem. They're not an East Coast problem or a national problem. They're a national problem. In looking at the data, we saw that these attacks covered 26 states plus the District of Columbia. In addition, the violence was pretty frightening. You had death threats that were being directed at volunteers and employees of pregnancy resource centers and pro-life advocacy groups. You had, in addition to that, arson. In some cases, buildings were literally set on fire. And the graffiti, which some people think is fairly benign and innocuous, was actually quite intimidating and intended to thwart people from doing their work. What struck us was that this is not the first time we're seeing this. The backdrop for all of this is an epidemic of violent attacks on Catholic sites, particularly churches, going all the way back to some of the George Floyd protests in May of 2020. 174 sites attacked, 38 states plus the District of Columbia. And in both cases, the response from federal law enforcement, at least at the headquarters level, has been mostly silence.
Now, Nathaniel, we're a big country. We've got 320 million people. Somebody might say, well, yeah, there's always bad actors and this stuff is normal. It's just it's political passion and people get too excited and do things they shouldn't do. But this really isn't new. Do you have any indication from the study about whether we're seeing an increase in this, or is this just the status quo that you're trying to shine a light on?
There have always been criminal attacks against religious people and their churches and their organizations. What struck us here was that, at least when it came to the Catholic community and the pro-life community, this was something new. In the case of pro-life organizations, just the explosion, the concentration, the volume of attacks following the Dobbs leak and then the Dobbs opinion itself was really quite exceptional. It wasn't a slow drip. We were seeing a lot of attacks in a very short period of time. Now, that's dissipated somewhat, but the findings in our assessment is that we can expect these attacks to continue, maybe not at the same volume, but to continue. But we also know from our experience in the United States and around the world that when there's a culture of impunity, when there's a lack of accountability for perpetrators, it emboldens others to attack in this way, and in some cases, to attack in an even more deadly fashion.
Tell us a bit more about that, because as you note there, the report concludes that these kind of attacks are likely to continue. Why do you think that is?
If potential criminals know that if they carry out these kind of attacks, if they engage in this kind of violence, that federal, state, local, and county law enforcement will investigate them, will prosecute them, will convict them, and they'll end up in jail. It'll deter at least some of them if they think that they can do it and get away with it. And if they also look around and see that the media is not paying attention, these stories have mostly been ignored by the national press. If they see that most elected officials are also overlooking this, if they see that there's a different standard for when there are attacks in other religious communities and one for people that are morally orthodox, that are pro-life and marriage and family, they're more likely to engage in this kind of violence.
We see in many other contexts and cities all around the country the fact that if you don't enforce the criminal laws, you get more crime. But your report expresses some concern about the way these attacks are being handled by law enforcement. Tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. You can't make a generalization about law enforcement across the country. In some instances, local law enforcement in particular has responded forcefully. They've investigated, they've arrested, they've prosecuted. But if you look at least the political leadership in our federal law enforcement agencies, the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security, the only times that they've really had anything to say about these attacks has been under duress. It's been in congressional hearings where members of Congress are asking them hard questions. It's been when members of Congress are sending them letters and demanding answers. That's really only when they've had anything to say about this. The kind of energy that we've seen, the kind of response and condemnation that we've seen in attacks on other religious communities in the past is simply not there. I think what's really heartbreaking for us is that this consensus that used to exist in America, that whoever you are, whatever your faith, however you view contentious matters of the day, like abortion or something else, if you were violently attacked, we will condemn it and we will take action. And that seems to have frayed and broken down.
Nathaniel Hurd, last question. What do you have to say to those pro-life churches and organizations that may find themselves in the crosshairs?
I'd say a few things. One, prepare yourselves. There are some congregations and organizations that seem to think that if they just keep their head down, then they're not going to be attacked. What we've seen with these attacks and in other instances is that if you haven't been attacked yet, you might be in the future. So improve your physical security, improve your cybersecurity, engage with local law enforcement, and speak up. Engage with your elected representatives, demand that they conduct oversight. This is something we're going to be tracking over the coming year. We've got a multi-year project focused on this, and people can find out more information at rfi.org.
Nathaniel Hurd, Religious Freedom Institute, thanks for your time today.
I appreciate it. Thanks again.